The hum of the Northwood Galleria was a dissonant symphony of forced holiday cheer. It was a sound Julian Vance had come to despise. Carols, tinny and thin, bled from hidden speakers, weaving through the cacophony of shoppers' chatter, the squeal of children, and the incessant ringing of a charity bell near the main entrance. For everyone else, this was the season of light and joy. For Julian, it was an annual pilgrimage into a ghost-filled cavern, each sparkling decoration a shard of glass. Against his heart, he sat on a polished marble bench, a solitary island of grey in a rushing river of vibrant red and green. His suit was impeccable, a tailored armor of charcoal wool that cost more than the combined outfits of the 20 people nearest him. It did nothing to warm the profound chill that had settled deep in his bones 5 years ago, and never left. His posture was rigid, his hands resting on his knees, one of them loosely circling the velvet ribbon of a small, perfectly wrapped gift box. The box was empty. It was always empty. Julian's gaze was unfocused, drifting over the spectacle before him without truly seeing it. He saw the blur of a family laughing as they posed for a picture with a weary-looking Santa. He saw teenagers chasing each other, their faces bright with the careless energy of youth. He saw couples holding hands, their intimacy a quiet rebuke to his own stark solitude. Each scene was a testament to a life he no longer knew how to live, a language he had forgotten how to speak. He was the CEO of Vance Technologies, a titan of industry whose name was synonymous with innovation and ruthless efficiency. In boardrooms, his quiet voice could silence arguments and command fortunes. Here, amidst the tinsel and fake snow, he was just a hollow man, haunted by the memory of a different Christmas, a different life, a life filled with the scent of cinnamon and pine, the sound of his wife Sarah's gentle laughter, and the hopeful promise of a nursery waiting to be filled. The small, empty box on his lap was for the daughter he never met, the daughter who had died with her mother on a slick, icy road just a week before Christmas. Every year, he came here, to the last place he and Sarah had been together, and he sat with the empty gift, a penance for having survived. It was a ritual of grief, a way to keep the wound fresh, because he was terrified that if it ever healed, he would forget her, and forgetting felt like a betrayal worse than death itself. A short distance away, near the grand, multi-storied Christmas tree that served as the mall's centerpiece, another world existed. Elara Hayes was trying to coax a smile out of her 5-year-old daughter, Lily. Lily was more interested in the mechanics of the animatronic reindeer, her small brow furrowed in concentration as she watched their heads jerk from side to side. "Look at the angel on top, sweet pea," Elara whispered, pointing a slender finger upwards. "Isn't she beautiful?" Elara's coat was thin, a pale blue wool that had seen better winters. It did little to ward off the drafts that snaked through the mall's vast corridors. She pulled it tighter, a gesture that was as much about conserving warmth as it was about holding herself together. Life was a constant balancing act, a careful dance between paying the rent for their tiny apartment and affording the small joys that made a childhood magical. The bookstore where she worked paid just enough to keep them afloat, but the current was always strong, always threatening to pull them under. Yet, looking at Lily, Elara felt a wealth that could not be measured in dollars. Her daughter was a small, bright sun in a sometimes grey sky. Lily saw the world with an astonishing clarity, her observations often simple, yet piercingly true. She didn't have a filter, a quality that could be both endearing and mortifying in public. Today, her wonder was a balm to Elara's own anxieties about the approaching holidays. Lily finally looked up at the angel, her eyes wide. "She looks cold," she declared with absolute certainty. Elara stifled a laugh. "I think she's made of light, honey. Light isn't cold." "Maybe," Lily conceded, but her attention was already drifting. Her gaze swept across the bustling concourse, past the frantic shoppers and the glittering displays. It landed with the unerring focus of a child on the still, silent figure on the marble bench. The man in the dark suit. She saw things others missed. She didn't see the expensive suit or the powerful set of his shoulders. She saw the invisible bubble that surrounded him, a shimmering wall of quiet that no one else seemed to notice. She saw the way his eyes looked at everything but saw nothing. It was a look she recognized, a look she sometimes saw in her own reflection in the window on nights when her mother thought she was asleep. Without a word, she let go of Elara's hand. "Lily, wait!" Elara called, but her daughter was already moving, a tiny figure in a pink coat, navigating the stream of people with determined grace. Julian was lost in a memory, the scent of the nearby pretzel stand momentarily replaced by the phantom fragrance of Sarah's perfume. He was remembering her hands, how they felt, arranging ornaments on their first tree together. He didn't notice the small presence at his side until he felt a gentle, insistent tug on the sleeve of his coat. He blinked, the memory shattering like a dropped ornament. He looked down. A little girl, with two bright pigtails and enormous, curious brown eyes, was staring up at him. She was holding a slightly crumpled candy cane in one hand. His first instinct was irritation, an intrusion, a disruption to his carefully managed grief. He opened his mouth to deliver a cold, dismissive word that would send her scurrying back to her parent, but the words died before they could form. She tilted her head, her expression one of genuine, unvarnished concern. "Are you lonely, too, mister?" she asked. Her voice was small, but clear, cutting through the mall's din and the noise in his own head with shocking precision. The question struck him with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't accusatory. It wasn't pitying. It was a simple, honest inquiry, from one soul to another, as if she were asking for the time. Lonely. He hadn't allowed himself to name the feeling in years. He called it grief. He called it remembrance. But she had stripped it bare and held it up to the light. It was loneliness, a vast, crushing loneliness. He couldn't speak. He could only stare at this tiny child who had seen straight through his armor, through the layers of wealth and power and pain, and identified the raw, shivering core of him. "Lily!" Elara's voice was breathless as she finally reached them. Her face was flushed with embarrassment. "Oh, I'm so sorry. She wandered off. Please, forgive her." She reached for Lily's hand, ready to pull her away, to disappear back into the anonymity of the crowd. But Julian found his voice. It was rough, rusty from disuse, in any context outside of business. "It's all right," he said. He looked from Elara's panicked face back down to the little girl, who was still waiting patiently for an answer. He couldn't lie to her. Not to that open, honest face. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "Yes," he heard himself say. The word a quiet confession. "Sometimes." Lily seemed to consider this. She then held out her half-eaten candy cane. "You can have a lick," she offered generously. "Mommy says sharing makes the sad go away for a little bit." A sound escaped Julian's throat. It was a strangled thing, halfway between a gasp and a laugh. It was the first sound of its kind he'd made in 5 years. The absurdity, the purity of the offer, cracked something in the icy facade he had so carefully constructed. Elara's mortification deepened. "Lily, no, don't bother the gentleman." She tugged on her daughter's arm more firmly. "We really have to go. Again, I am so sorry." "Wait," Julian said. The word sharper than he intended. He softened his tone. "Please, don't go." He felt a sudden, inexplicable panic at the thought of them leaving, of being returned to his silent vigil on the bench. He looked at Elara, truly looked at her for the first time. He saw the worry in her eyes, the weariness at the edges of her smile, but also a deep, quiet strength. An idea, foreign and impulsive, took hold. "It's cold out here," he said, gesturing vaguely at the bustling concourse. Would you let me buy you both a hot chocolate?" To thank her. He looked at Lily. "For the offer." Elara hesitated. Her instinct screamed at her to refuse. This man was from a different world. His suit, his watch, the very air of quiet authority around him, it was all intimidating. But then She looked at his eyes. Beneath the cold grey surface, she saw a flicker of something she recognized, the same profound loneliness her daughter had identified. And she saw the way he looked at Lily, not with annoyance, but with a kind of stunned wonder. We wouldn't want to impose, she said weakly. It would not be an imposition, Julian said, his voice gaining a measure of its usual confidence, though the feeling behind it was entirely new. It would be a kindness. Lily made the decision for them. Hot chocolate, she squealed, clapping her hands. With marshmallows? Julian looked at the little girl, and a genuine smile, small and hesitant, touched his lips for the first time. With as many marshmallows as you want. The cafe was a small pocket of tranquility tucked away in a less trafficked wing of the mall. The air inside was warm and thick with the scent of coffee beans and melted chocolate. Soft jazz, played from unseen speakers, a gentle counterpoint to the holiday chaos outside. It was a world away from the cold marble bench. Julian led them to a quiet booth in the corner. Its worn leather seats a comforting embrace. He slid the empty gift box onto the seat beside him, a silent companion to their unlikely meeting. He felt awkward, out of his element. He knew how to negotiate multi-million-dollar contracts, but he had no idea how to make small talk with a kind-eyed woman and her precocious child. Thankfully, Lily required no such social lubricant. As soon as a waitress had taken their order, 2 hot chocolates with extra whipped cream and marshmallows for Lily and Elara, and a black coffee for Julian, she launched into a detailed monologue about her day. My teacher, Mrs. Gable, has a hamster named Squeaky, she announced, kicking her feet happily beneath the table. And he ate a piece of my crayon, the blue one. Mummy says he will have a blue tummy now. Elara shot Julian an apologetic look. She's a storyteller. It's fine, Julian said, and he was surprised to find that it was. He was listening, truly listening, as the child chattered on about school, about the big dog that lived in the apartment below theirs, about her wish for a doll that could really cry. He found the stream of innocent consciousness strangely soothing. It was life, unedited and unfiltered, and it was slowly pushing back the silence in his own mind. He watched Elara as she listened to her daughter. She had a way of being completely present, her attention focused solely on Lily, her expression a mixture of love and gentle amusement. There was a quiet grace about her, a resilience that was evident in the way she held herself. He noticed the slight fraying at the cuff of her coat, the careful way she nursed her single cup of hot chocolate when it arrived, as if it were a precious luxury. What do you do? Elara asked, her voice soft, pulling him from his observations. It was a simple question, but it felt loaded. I'm in technology, he answered, deliberately vague. He didn't want to be Julian Vance, CEO. He wanted, for a few minutes, to just be Julian. The man on the bench, the man Lily thought was lonely. That sounds interesting, she said, and he could tell she was sincere. She didn't press for details. Lily, her upper lip now adorned with a whipped cream mustache, pointed a small, sticky finger at the box on the seat. Is that a present? Julian's brief respite from his grief ended. The chill returned. He looked at the box, its cheerful wrapping suddenly seeming like a mockery. Yes, he said, his voice tightening. Who is it for? Lily pressed, her curiosity absolute. Lily, that's not polite, Elara admonished gently. It's for someone I used to know, Julian managed to say. The words felt like stones in his throat. He saw the flicker of understanding and sadness in Elara's eyes, and she quickly changed the subject, asking Lily to tell her about the drawing she'd made in art class. The moment passed, but the connection had deepened. A silent acknowledgement of shared sorrow hung in the air, a fragile thread woven between them in the warm, chocolate-scented cafe. They were 2 strangers from different worlds, brought together by a child who saw no walls, only a shared human feeling. When they finished, Julian insisted on walking them to the bookstore where Elara worked her evening shift. It was a small, charming place called The Last Page, tucked between a garish electronics store and a trendy boutique. The windows were filled with books and whimsical displays, a quiet haven in the commercial storm. "This is you," he said, a statement of fact, not a question. The gentle, thoughtful nature of the store seemed a perfect reflection of her. Elara smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that lit up her face. "It's my favorite place in the world," she confessed. "Even when I'm just shelving books, it feels like home." At the entrance, they paused. The moment felt charged with an unspoken potential. "Thank you for the hot chocolate," Elara said sincerely. "You didn't have to do that." "Thank you," he countered, looking down at Lily, who was now sleepily leaning against her mother's leg. "For the company." Lily looked up at him, her eyes drowsy but clear. "You're not so lonely now, are you, mister?" Julian felt that crack in his chest widen just a little more. "No," he said softly, "not so much." As he watched them disappear into the warm light of the bookstore, Julian Vance stood alone in the mall corridor, the empty box feeling infinitesimally lighter in his hand. He had come here to honor a ghost, to sit with his pain. He was leaving with the faint, sweet taste of hot chocolate on his tongue and the echo of a child's question in his ears. For the first time in 5 years, the future did not feel like a barren, endless expanse of winter. It felt instead like the possibility of a fragile, uncertain spring. The encounter lingered with Julian long after he left the mall. Back in his penthouse apartment, a sterile masterpiece of glass and steel overlooking the city, the silence felt different. It was no longer a familiar companion, but an oppressive weight. The meticulously curated emptiness of the space, once a reflection of his controlled grief, now felt desolate. He stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city lights, a cold, glittering tapestry below. He thought of the warm, cluttered charm of the last page. He thought of the way Elara's eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled. He thought of Lily's unwavering, innocent gaze. They had appeared in his monochrome world like a sudden splash of color, vivid and startling. A strange, unfamiliar impulse drove him. The next day, he found himself back at the mall. He told himself it was illogical, that he had business to attend to. But his feet carried him, as if of their own accord, down the familiar corridors until he stood before the bookstore. He hesitated outside, feeling like a nervous teenager. What was he even doing here? He, who could command the attention of global markets, was intimidated by the thought of walking into a small bookshop. He pushed the thought aside and entered. The little bell above the door chimed, and Elara looked up from behind the counter. A flicker of surprise, followed by a warm, welcoming smile, crossed her face. "Hello," she said, her voice a soft melody over the quiet rustle of pages. "Hello," he replied, feeling strangely breathless. "I was in the area. I thought I might buy a book." It was a flimsy excuse, and they both knew it. Lily was there, sitting at a small table in the children's section, diligently coloring a picture of a dragon. She looked up and beamed when she saw him. "Lonely, mister," she exclaimed, a title she had apparently bestowed upon him. Elara's cheeks flushed slightly. "Lily, his name is Mr. Vance." "Julian," he corrected gently, his eyes on Elara. "Please, call me Julian." That day became the first of many. A new routine, fragile and tentative, began to form. Julian would leave his office tower early, driven by a pull he no longer questioned, and find his way to the bookstore. He would buy a book. His collection of unread classic novels was growing at an alarming rate, and they would talk. He learned about her life in small, quiet pieces. She had been a student of literature before Lily was born. Lily's father had left when he found out she was pregnant. A brief, painful chapter she spoke of without bitterness, only a quiet sadness. She had moved here for a fresh start, building a small, safe world for her daughter, a world made of stories and quiet kindness. In turn, he found himself opening up in ways he never had before. He didn't speak of Sarah, not yet, but he spoke of his work, the pressures, the isolation at the top. He spoke of the feeling of being surrounded by people, yet always feeling apart from them. With Elara, he didn't feel the need to perform. He could just be. Her presence was a balm, a quiet acceptance that asked for nothing. The true bridge between them always was Lily. She was completely unafraid of his reserved nature. She would show him her drawings, ask him serious questions about whether robots had feelings, and once she fell asleep with her head in his lap as he sat in the worn armchair in the children's section, a trust so absolute it made his heart ache. One evening, a week before Christmas, the mall was closing. The usual crowds had thinned, leaving a hushed quiet in their wake. Snow had begun to fall outside, blanketing the world in a soft, forgiving white. Julian had stayed late, helping Elara shelve a new shipment of books. Lily was asleep on a pile of cushions in the back room. They worked in a comfortable silence, the only sound the soft slide of books into their places. The air was filled with the dry, comforting scent of paper and ink. "You know," Elara said, her voice soft in the stillness. "You never told me who the present was for." She wasn't prying. Her tone was gentle, an invitation, not a demand. Julian stopped, a heavy art history book in his hands. He looked at her kind, patient face, illuminated by the warm lamplight. He knew in that moment that he could tell her, that he wanted to tell her. He set the book down and led her to the two armchairs where they often sat. He took a deep breath, the story he had held locked inside for 5 years rising to the surface. "It was for my daughter," he began, his voice low and strained. "Her name was going to be Olivia. He told her everything. He spoke of Sarah, his college sweetheart, the brilliant, laughing woman who had been the sun in his sky. He spoke of their excitement, the plans they had made, the tiny room they had painted yellow. He told her about the accident, the icy road, the phone call that had shattered his world into a million irreparable pieces. He spoke of the hospital, the sterile white walls, the doctor's empty words of condolence. He had lost them both in the space of a single, screeching heartbeat. "The box," he said, his voice finally breaking, "was the first gift I bought for Olivia, a little silver locket. I was going to give it to Sarah to put away for her. We were at this mall that day. We had just bought it." Tears he hadn't shed in years traced hot paths down his cheeks. He didn't try to hide them. He felt Elara's hand gently cover his. She didn't speak. She didn't offer empty platitudes or tell him it would be okay. She just sat with him in his grief, her quiet presence, a sturdy anchor in his storm-tossed memory. She shared the weight of it without trying to take it away. When he finally fell silent, the raw, aching story told, she simply squeezed his hand. "Thank you for telling me," she whispered. A small noise made them both turn. Lily stood in the doorway of the back room, rubbing her eyes sleepily. She was holding a piece of paper. She had clearly overheard some of what he'd said. She walked over to Julian, her face serious. She didn't say anything about his tears. She just held up the drawing. It was a child's simple rendering. 3 stick figures under a bright, smiling sun and a lopsided Christmas tree. One figure was tall, one was medium, and one was small. "That's Mummy," she said, pointing to the medium figure with Elara's wavy hair. "And that's me." She pointed to the smallest one. Then her finger moved to the tall, dark-haired figure standing between them. "And that's you. We're a family for Christmas." Julian stared at the drawing, at the 3 figures holding hands. A family. The word struck him with the same force as her first question had. He looked from the simple crayon drawing to Elara's tear-filled eyes, and then to Lily's trusting face. The gaping hole in his life, the one he had so fiercely protected, suddenly felt not so empty. It felt like it was being filled with a new, terrifying, and beautiful light. He took the drawing from her small hand, his fingers trembling. It was the most precious gift he had ever received. The company holiday gala was an annual affair Julian usually endured with stoic detachment. It was a command performance, a night of superficial pleasantries and strategic networking held in the opulent ballroom of a downtown hotel. This year, however, was different. This year, he wanted Elara and Lily to be there with him. It was more than just a date, it was a statement, both to the world and to himself. He was stepping out of the shadows of his past. He wanted to share his world with them, to bridge the gap between the isolated CEO and the man who sat in a bookstore armchair. Elara was hesitant at first, intimidated by the thought of his lavish world. But Julian was gently persuasive, and Lily's excitement at the idea of a real-life princess party was impossible to resist. He had a simple, elegant navy dress delivered to the bookstore for Elara, and a velvet, forest green dress for Lily. It was not a gesture of charity, but one of care, a way to ease her anxieties. When he picked them up from their small apartment, he was stunned. Elara looked breathtaking. The simple dress highlighted her quiet grace, and her hair was swept up in a soft style that framed her face. But it was the light in her eyes, a mixture of nervousness and excitement, that truly captivated him. And Lily, in her green velvet, looked like a tiny woodland fairy. Walking into the ballroom on his arm, Elara felt a wave of self-consciousness. The room was a sea of glittering jewels and designer gowns. The air hummed with power and wealth. She felt like an imposter, a simple sparrow in a flock of peacocks. But Julian's hand, there was a warm, steady presence on the small of her back, a silent reassurance. "You belong here," he whispered in her ear. "You belong with me." For a while it was magical. Lily was mesmerized by the towering Christmas tree and the orchestra playing classical music. Several of Julian's more personable employees, seeing their famously reserved boss smiling and attentive, came over to be introduced, their warmth putting Elara at ease. Julian never left her side, his attention focused solely on her and Lily, making them feel like the only people in the room. He was happy, genuinely, openly happy, and seeing him that way filled Elara's heart with a profound warmth. The moment shattered, as such moments often do, with a few carelessly spoken words. Julian was momentarily distracted by his senior vice president when a man named Marcus Thorne, a business rival with a perpetually condescending smirk, approached Elara. Well, Marcus said, his eyes raking over Elara's simple dress with undisguised disdain. "Vance is certainly diversifying his portfolio. Tell me, where did he find you? I must say, it's a bold strategy, this rags-to-riches fairy tale." The words, laced with venom and insinuation, struck Elara like a physical slap. The warmth drained from her face. She felt herself shrink, all her insecurities rushing back in a tidal wave. She was the bookstore girl, the single mother in a borrowed dress, a curiosity in this world of polished predators. Julian turned back just in time to catch the tail end of the comment and see the wounded look on Elara's face, a cold, dangerous fury, the likes of which he hadn't felt in years, surged through him. He stepped in front of Elara, shielding her with his body, his eyes locking onto Marcus with glacial intensity. "Get away from her, Marcus." Julian's voice was lethally quiet. "Now!" Marcus, taken aback by the raw menace in Julian's tone, gave a weak sneer and slinked away into the crowd. But the damage was done. The beautiful, fragile bubble had been burst. It wasn't just Marcus's comment. It was the sudden, horrifying realization that crashed down on Julian. He had brought them here, into his world, a world full of people like Marcus. He had exposed them to this casual cruelty. What if he couldn't protect them? The fear was a cold, sharp echo of the ultimate failure to protect Sarah. The past rose up like a phantom, whispering that he was destined to bring pain to those he loved. And another, more insidious thought wormed its way into his mind. Guilt. He was here, happy, with this beautiful woman and this wonderful child. Was he replacing Sarah and Olivia? Was this a betrayal of their memory? The joy he had felt moments before curdled into a toxic mix of fear and self-loathing. He panicked, his walls, the ones that had been so carefully dismantled, slammed back into place. His expression became shuttered, his body rigid. He turned to Elara, but his eyes were distant, looking through her. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice clipped and formal. "This was a mistake. You shouldn't be here." Elara's heart fractured. She didn't understand the source of his sudden change, only its effect. The warmth was gone, replaced by the cold, distant man from the marble bench. Marcus's cruel words echoed in her ears, now seemingly validated by Julian's own. She didn't belong. "I'll have my driver take you home," he said, already signaling for an assistant. He didn't look at her. He couldn't. He was afraid of what he would see in her eyes, afraid of the pain he was causing. He was a coward, running back to the safety of his lonely fortress. The ride back to the apartment was silent. Elara held a confused and sleepy Lily in her arms, her own tears held tightly in check. She felt a fool. She had allowed herself to hope, to believe that a fairy tale might be possible. But she was just a chapter in his story, she thought, and he had decided to turn the page. For the next 2 days, Julian was a ghost. He threw himself into his work with a desperate, punishing intensity. He was brusque with his staff, his old coldness returning with a vengeance. He ignored calls, cancelled meetings, and sat in his silent office, staring at spreadsheets he didn't see. He was miserable. The loneliness he had kept at bay for weeks returned, deeper and more profound than ever before, because now he knew what he was missing. The silence in his apartment was no longer just an absence of sound. It was filled with the echoes of Lily's laughter and the memory of Elara's gentle voice. He had pushed away the best thing that had happened to him in 5 years, all because of his own fear. He had hurt her. He had hurt them both. The thought was a constant, sharp pain in his chest. On the 3rd day, his assistant, a kind, elderly man named Mr. Harrison, who had been with him for years, entered his office tentatively. "Sir, I tidied your desk last night. I found this. I didn't want to throw it away." Mr. Harrison placed a small, slightly crumpled piece of paper on the polished mahogany desk. It was Lily's drawing, the 3 stick figures holding hands under the smiling sun. "We're a family for Christmas." Julian stared at the drawing. He saw the simple, absolute love in every crayon stroke. He saw the future he was so stupidly, so fearfully throwing away. Lily hadn't seen a CEO and a bookstore clerk. She had seen 3 people who belonged together. Her innocent eyes had seen the truth his own fear had blinded him to. He remembered her first question, the one that had started it all. "Are you lonely too, mister?" He had been, but he wasn't anymore. He was just afraid of happiness, afraid of loss, afraid of being worthy of a second chance, and his fear was costing him everything that mattered. A sudden, fierce clarity cut through the fog of his despair. He knew what he had to do. He stood up so abruptly, his chair scraped against the floor. He grabbed the drawing and his coat. "Mr. Harrison," he said, his voice firm and clear for the first time in days, "cancel the rest of my day. Cancel the rest of my week if you have to." Without another word, he strode out of the office, leaving his bewildered but secretly pleased assistant behind. He wasn't running from his fear anymore. He was running toward his hope. The bell above the bookstore door chimed, a sound that now felt like a prelude to his entire future. Julian stepped inside, his heart pounding against his ribs. The store was quiet, bathed in the soft afternoon light filtering through the front window. A few customers browsed the shelves, but his eyes found her immediately. Elara was standing near the poetry section, carefully placing books on a shelf. She looked pale, the light gone from her eyes. There were faint, dark circles beneath them, and her movements were listless, mechanical. Seeing her like that, seeing the pain he had caused etched onto her face, was like a knife to his own heart. She heard the bell and looked up. When she saw him, her expression shuttered. She tensed, bracing herself for more hurt, for a final, formal goodbye. She turned back to the bookshelf, presenting him with her back a clear wall of dismissal. "Elara," he said, his voice raw. She didn't turn around. "If you're here to apologize for my mistake in thinking I belonged with you, you don't have to. I understand perfectly." Her voice was brittle, stripped of its usual warmth. "No," he said, walking slowly towards her until he was standing just behind her. "I'm here to apologize for my mistake, for being a coward." She stilled, a book held halfway to the shelf. He took a deep breath, the words pouring out of him in a rush of desperate honesty. "What I said that night, it had nothing to do with you. It was all about me, about my fear." He told her everything he had felt when he saw Marcus talking to her. The blinding rage, and then the terrifying, paralyzing fear that he would fail her, that his world would hurt her, that he couldn't protect her the way he hadn't been able to protect Sarah. "For 5 years I've lived in a fortress I built around myself," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought it was keeping me safe, but it was just a prison. You and Lily, you walked right in and showed me there was a world outside those walls. You brought light into a place that had been dark for so long. And I got scared. I got so scared of losing that light that I did the most stupid thing imaginable. I tried to snuff it out myself." He stepped around so he could see her face. Tears were silently streaming down her cheeks. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment before he gently wiped a tear away with his thumb. "Pushing you away was the greatest mistake of my life," he whispered. "The last few days, without you, without Lily, it's been a worse hell than the last 5 years combined, because now I know what I'm missing. I don't want to be the lonely mister on the bench anymore, Elara. I want to be the man holding your hand. I want to be the man who gets to read Lily bedtime stories and watch her grow up." He held out the small, crumpled drawing Lily had made. "She was right. This is what I want. A family. With you. If you'll have me. If you can forgive me." Elara looked from the drawing to his face, at the raw vulnerability in his eyes, the desperate hope etched into every line of his expression. The hurt and anger that had encased her heart began to melt away, replaced by the deep, resonant truth of his words. She saw not the powerful CEO, but the wounded man who was brave enough to show her his scars. She let the book she was holding clatter to the floor. She stepped forward into his space and wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. He responded immediately, his arms encircling her, holding her tightly as if he would never let go. "I forgive you," she sobbed into his coat. "I was so scared." "I know," he murmured into her hair, his own eyes closing in profound relief. "Me too, but I'm not scared anymore. Not as long as I have you." They stood there for a long time, simply holding each other in the quiet sanctuary of the bookstore, two broken people finding their way back to whole in each other's arms. From the back room, Lily, who had been pretending to be asleep, peeked out. A slow, happy smile spread across her face. Her family was back together. 1 year later, the Northwood Galleria was once again a symphony of holiday cheer. The same tinny carols played, the same charity bell rang, the same frantic energy pulsed through the crowded corridors. But for Julian Vance, everything was different. He sat on the polished marble bench, the very same one where his life had changed forever. But he was not alone. Lily, now 6 years old and bubbling with excitement, was nestled on his lap, pointing at the giant animatronic reindeer. "Look, Julian, their heads are still wobbly," she giggled, her breath fogging in the cool air. He laughed, a deep, easy sound that came from his soul. "They certainly are, little one." His arm was wrapped securely around Elara, who was leaning against his shoulder, her hand resting warmly on his. He looked at her, at the peaceful, happy smile on her face, and felt a sense of rightness so profound it almost overwhelmed him. The past year had been one of discovery, of slowly, carefully weaving their lives together. He had bought the building that housed the last page, not as a grand gesture of wealth, but to ensure Elara would never have to worry about a landlord raising her rent or selling the property. The bookstore was her dream, and he wanted to protect it. They had moved into a new home, one they chose together. Not his sterile penthouse, but a warm, comfortable house with a big backyard and a room painted a cheerful shade of yellow, waiting for Lily's new art projects. The small, empty gift box was gone. It was tucked away in a memory chest, its ritual no longer needed. The ghosts of his past had not vanished, but they had receded. They were no longer haunting presences, but gentle memories, integrated into a life that was now full and vibrant and moving forward. He had learned that creating a new family was not a betrayal of the old one, but an honoring of the love that had defined it. Sarah would have wanted him to be happy. He knew that now. Elara turned her head and kissed his cheek. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. He looked from her loving eyes to the bright, beautiful face of the child in his lap. He thought of the man who had sat here a year ago, a hollow shell of a person, drowning in a grief he thought would be his only companion for life. He tightened his hold on them both, a feeling of overwhelming gratitude washing over him. He was no longer the lonely mister on the bench. He was a partner. He was a father. "I was just thinking," he said, his voice full of a quiet, unshakable joy, "that I'm finally home.